I know I've talked about this before, and I've talked about this in several little blog posts, that, you know, it's not really much of a stretch. And I can recall times in my dreams where I've seen an image of something, and then the language part of my brain would put a word to that image, and then think, oh, well, there's another image related to that thing. Right? For example, you know, you thinking about falling in your life or not being able to get anywhere in your life, and then the language part of your brain thinking, oh, what other images are associated with falling and not being able to get anywhere? Oh, the physical, just physically falling and physically not being able to get anywhere. And so, you know, dreams are just created by your brain. You know, your brain knows how to use metaphors, so it's not outlandish at all to think that dreams are metaphorical. So, I read a book by Julian Jaynes, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, and it is. I think there was a book on Hitler that I did this with, but I think that Hitler book and this book are the only books that I read cover to cover, wanting to read the next page all the way through. You know, most books I have to kind of take a break and kind of force myself to continue reading. But that book and that book on Hitler were the only two books that I've read that I wanted to read the next page all the way through. And Julian Jaynes' theory is absolutely fascinating, and there's no way I can do justice to it in a video like this, or even in. I don't think I can do justice to it, period. But he was talking about people having waking dreams, and as they go around in their daily lives, and they have dream imagery, you know, and they have. They hallucinate voices, okay, and I don't know if you can recall a time where you hallucinated a voice in real life. I've hallucinated a voice. Where were they? There was one time when I was little, but all my hallucinations, my two verbal hallucinations, they were just really quick. One of them was I was in, it was my first day at middle school, and I went into the middle school, and there were a whole bunch of people crowding through the hallway, and it was a new thing to me because I come from elementary school. Now I'm going to middle school. Whoa, this is freaking packed. This is huge. And then I heard a huge booming voice go, "The shell will come off." What the heck? And I was, I was wondering, did other people hear this voice? I was wondering if it came out over the intercom or something, but they didn't seem to hear anything. So I guess it was me. Another time was when I was a lot younger. I think I was either in first grade or in kindergarten. We were on this little field trip, and there were 2 vans, okay? And each kid was assigned to a van, and we were out at this little, hiking area, and I kind of went off on my own. And I was off my own. I forget what I was doing. I think I was playing with bugs or something. And I heard a voice that said, "Go back!" Well, so I went back to where I knew people were, and as it turned out, the van that I was assigned to had left without me. That they forgot me or something, or they checked me off without me actually being in the van. And so I got into the other van, and the driver and the little guy, he said, what did he say? He said, you aren't you in the other van, or you're supposed to be in the other van, or something like that. But that van had already left, so they let me in, and I was able to get there. So, as opposed to being stranded in this little public park area that we went on a field trip to. Religious people, what are religious people going to do when they hear those voices? They're going to assign it to God. And, in fact, that is what I did. Right? But now I know that it just came from my own brain. Julian Jaynes was saying in his book, Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, that these voices come from your own brain. And that people in ancient times had lots and lots of these voices coming from their own brain at a much higher rate than we do today. And he speculates as to why that may be. Maybe it's just some innate thing that just got evolutionarily selected out. Maybe it has to do with the environment creating like a bunch of psychoses. I don't know, it's hard to tell. I mean, I'm thinking of like an environmental thing. Well, what was the lifestyle of ancient people? Pretty damn dull. And they were all farmers, and they were all farming on the same little small plot of land all the time. What was parenting like? Well, parenting was, from what we can tell, not very nice. Women have a lot of kids, and if they had a kid that they couldn't take care of, they exposed it. They dumped it. I know the infant mortality rate was horrific, and so they'd have a kid, and the mom, it made a lot of sense not to get too attached to the kid at a very young age until you knew it would live. We hear stories about people not naming their kids until they are like 5 or 6 years old because they don't want to get attached to it because there's a very high likelihood that they're going to die. And so there's all these little hardships, and these people, they had to deal with these hardships, and they had to get their mind around these hardships, and perhaps that's what happened. Now, the the area in which these hallucinations come from, and this is also very interesting, is Julian Jaynes cited a study where, I think it was in Ontario or some study, but basically what they did is they stuck little electrodes in people's brains, and they stimulated areas of all these of their brains. And what the researchers found is that when they stuck I think there's Wernicke's area and there's Broca's area. I'm going to get them mixed up. Okay. There's the left hemisphere. There's the area associated with speech on the left hemisphere, and there's an analog area on the right hemisphere. What was found is when they stimulated areas on the right hemisphere that are kind of like the analog of the left hemisphere language area and verbal areas, and they stimulated those areas, the person started hallucinating sounds. They started hallucinating voices. They stimulated those areas, and they started stimulating these other areas, and were able to develop full-blown hallucinations. People, and not only, and the thing, like when you hear voices, it's kind of like it's not just voices, because like, well, first one big thing is that when you hear a voice outside of you, you can physically plug your ears, you can physically avoid the voice. But more importantly is that you can filter it out, right? Even if someone has has your arms tied behind your back, is yelling at you something, you can still choose to filter out the noise. And we do this all the time. We do this all the time, filtering out white noise. My computer, for example, makes a lot of noise all the time, but I just filter it out. So we are able to filter out noise. You can't do that with a voice in your head. It's not that you can't plug your ears, or it's not just that you can't plug your ears and you can't go into a room. You cannot filter it out. It is in you. You are listening. Like when the voice inside your head says something, you are listening. It's not even a choice because it's inside, right? And it's kind of trippy to even think about it. You are listening. When it speaks, you are listening. And you can also have kind of like a sensed presence. Now, to understand what it's like to have a sensed presence, you can just do that right now. Like you can, like imagine a door or something, or imagine, kids do it all the time. They imagine something under their bed. Okay, so just think about like I can think outside of this window, or think about something like on that there's there's like an empty area on the other side, right? And you can just imagine for a moment that there's someone on the other side there. There's something on the other side there, right? You can. What I do is I would look at a door and I would imagine something on the other side of the door, right? And it would freak, and I could freak myself out doing this. So it's possible to imagine and sense presences, right? You can also see things out of the corner of your eyes. Interesting experiment people do is if you take something in the corner of your eyes and kind of put it there, right, and you look at it, right, now look ahead, and you take it out, and you take it very close to the end of your vision, and then, like, they pull it away. See, I'm pulling it away, and so I can kind of, I know it's going away because I'm moving my hand, but if someone else is doing it, if they put it to the very tip of the peripheral of your vision, leave it there, and then pull it away, you'll still see it. And the reason for that is because the brain is, at those very tips, it's kind of making stuff up, right? Your brain makes stuff up there. So, and a lot of people have had this. Because the brain makes stuff up at the corners of the eye, that's where it's easy to hallucinate. And so a lot of people say, like they're walking along, especially if it's late at night or something, it's like, oh, I saw something out the corner of my eye. Oh no, it was just a stick or just a squirrel or something. But like, yeah, a lot of people will see something out of the corner of their eye and then go, oh, right? So you kind of know what a visual hallucination is like. I think most people have had at least one experience of an auditory hallucination. Obviously, we know what dreams are like, right? So the elements are all there. So the idea that people in ancient times were having full-on, visual auditory hallucinations, like, regularly, it's not theoretically impossible. And when you look at, just another thing about Julian Jaynes' theory, it's very interesting, is that, the right hemisphere develops holosis, the left hemisphere develops analysis. That's a gross generalization, but generally, I'll say, is that when you go into a room and everyone stares at you for a moment, you develop a holosis about the room. That is, you develop a holistic induction of everything, and then you try to make sense of it, try to make an understanding of it in a novel situation. Now, as you're in a situation for longer and longer periods of time, the way you deal with that situation, the way you make sense of that situation, shifts from the right hemisphere over to the left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is more analytic, and so you get more accurate representations of the world from the left hemisphere, but not as fast. And so it's not as effective in novel situations. So you have ancient man who's in a novel situation. And in fact, what Julian Jaynes noted in his book was that it was precisely in these novel situations that they started hallucinating voices and they started hallucinating images. The same types of voices and images that these researchers were able to stimulate when stimulating certain parts of the right hemisphere, right? So that's quite interesting. Now, a problem with this is that, it's just, the right hemisphere. And of course, the right hemisphere, it's just brain matter, right? It can be wrong. You can have, like that's what I don't think a lot of people appreciate, is that you can do a dream analysis, for example, and you can have a perfectly correct dream analysis. And you can follow the advice that comes from the dream analysis, and the advice can be wrong. Right? You can do everything right, and the advice can be wrong. Because, it's just brain. brains are wrong all the time. So, and when you have an ancient man who's hallucinating a god, well, gods can be wrong all the time. You look at ancient religions compared to more modern religions, they're all polytheistic. There are all sorts of gods. And that makes sense because people are having all sorts of visions. And now there's all sorts of gods, and there's a lot more variation. And I think having 10 gods, for example, really helps out when people have all sorts of visions. They have their particular visions, all right, saying, well, is it this god, is it this god, is it this god? Right? If you have 10 different gods, you're more likely to say something that can plausibly be what this other person was interpreting. Whereas if you have, only one god, it's like, oh, you saw demons or something. Like, so you have that. But another thing, though, is that there is cultural expectancy. Right? For example, people, like if you're an atheist, for example, and you have hallucinations, you tend to have hallucinations about UFOs, aliens from outer space. Or, you'll have hallucinations about the New World Order watching you. What was that movie where the guy was hallucinating those secret agents, and he would go into these rooms and try to find the patterns, the secret codes in the newspapers, and these guys who like the guy dressed up like as a government agent. And so what this guy was doing is he was doing all these things, trying to connect all these things in the newspapers. It was a fascinating film. Fortunately, he had a bunch of... I remember there was some commie BS, some economics. There's Adam Smith was wrong. Basically, a complete straw man of Adam Smith. Basically saying Adam Smith was against collective action. No, he was not. You're stupid. The people who made that movie are stupid. Anyway, I'm digressing. But other than that, it was a fascinating movie, and talking about the guy having those hallucinations, and of course, his hallucination was about some government official. Right? You have other people who are schizophrenic today. They think about the New World Order, or they imagine UFOs, or if they're highly religious, they imagine angels and demons. Or if they lived in Egypt, they imagined the Egyptian pantheon. Or Greece, they imagined the Greek pantheon. So, I don't know what else to say at this point. My evaluation of this theory is that it's really fascinating and it makes a lot of sense. And what he would, and another thing that's very interesting is he's going into these old Greek works, and historians mostly interpret these works as being metaphorical. For example, you have Homer and Iliad and the Odyssey, whatever, and there are the people in there, and they there's very little introspection in these works, especially the old ones, the old works. There's very little introspection. And all the decisions that they have, they consult with the gods. Now, historians looked at this and they thought, oh, these are just literary devices. These are just metaphors for, like, the internal decision-making process, kind of like, having the devil on one shoulder and the angel on another. Right? It's not that, like, we actually hallucinate a devil and an angel on each shoulder. No, that's just a metaphor for the internal thought processes that we have. And so we look at the Greeks doing this, and we think, oh, well, they must be doing what we're doing, having this metaphor for an internal thought process. Julian Jaynes is saying, no. Like, these people were straight up hallucinating these things. I mean, it was straight up, not a metaphor. And then Julian Jaynes also shows in his book that over time, Greek writing changes, and different revisions of the Iliad and the Odyssey actually have less consulting with the gods and more of what we would consider modern introspection and modern self critical thought and stuff. And another thing, like he was talking about how the Greeks, how the next phase from going from to directly consulting with the gods was Greeks would talk about their thumos rising or their phrenes rising, which was the the lungs. That was lungs and breathing inflated, and it was called like the phrenes and the thumos and some other stuff. And they're talking about all these internal processes that are going on in their physical body as being something outside of their control, right? As being something separate from them. And that's where the title comes from, the bicameral mind. Because like when I breathe or something, I go, that's me breathing. Like, I view my consciousness as a single thing, not bicameral, not split, not, here's Mr. Right Brain and Mr. Left Brain. No, it's a single thing, right? And Julian Jaynes was saying, no, back then it was not a single thing, and the other entity was a god. But as it slowly started getting broken down, he's analyzing the Greeks, kind of Greek-centric. As the bicameral mind started to break down, it wasn't immediate, right? You still had the phrenes and the thumos, right? And the Greeks in between, straight up thinking that the gods were advising them. From that to modern introspection, there was kind of a muddled intermediary period. And this muddled intermediary period he talks about was very interesting. And he talks about the oracles, and how early on in the oracles, people would go there and they would hear these, like people would go there and they could easily have these hallucinatory fits, no problem. But slowly as time went on, they had to early on, like people would go there, they would go to the oracles and they would sleep there, and they would have visions. They themselves would have visions there. Then as time went on, only certain people would have visions, and they would speak of these visions, and then a preacher would have to interpret them. And over time, the visions got more and more erratic. The oracles got more and more staged. And what Jaynes's contention is that what was happening is that the visions were breaking down as the bicameral mind was breaking down, and fewer people were able to genuinely have these visions, until at one point it just became kind of known that the people there were faking it, and the priests were kind of just interpreting it, kind of like modern fortune cookie kind of thing. So, and it's a fascinating book, and I really recommend that book. Don't know how to end this video. Just something to think about when thinking about ancient man and ancient minds. It's really interesting to think about people who thought in such a different way, and you can kind of have a visceral understanding what it is. Analogically, you can have a visceral understanding, because like we've all hallucinated. We've all seen things out of the corner of our mind. A few of us have had a few auditory hallucinations, and so I can just like kind of imagine that like times 1,000. And I've had dreams, that's gross. I've had dreams, so I kind of know what the imagery looks like. But see, I have an advantage, right? Because I have science, right? I know how the brain works, and not only do I have a knowledge of science, but I have a scientific mindset, because I grew up in a society that thinks that way, and so I'm kind of at a bit of an advantage, not because of my inherent superiority, but just because of the world in which I brought up. And so when I see something out of the corner of my eye, I don't imagine that like some spirit darted by. I don't interpret it that way. Or if right now, like if I were to hear an auditory hallucination, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'd be spooked, right? Because it is spooky, and because it's like, because you get a sensed presence, and there's a voice that you hear that there's no way you can shut off. Like you can't not listen to it. So I'd be spooked. I'd be genuinely spooked. But I would know what it was, all right, and I could, understand what it was, and when I have a dream, I know that I didn't actually fly off to some magical place and experience a magical thing. Right? I know that it was a dream. I know that it was just a concoction of my own brain, and that enables me to not take it as seriously as ancient people did. But I do know that the right brain has some advice, and that is why I am a big fan of dream analysis. Ancient man didn't have to do dream analysis because they had straight up waking dreams where the gods were talking to them and they could consult the gods and stuff like that. We don't have that luxury. We'll put that in quotes. Luxury, because I definitely would not want to live a life like that. And so we just have dreams. And in dreams, we can analyze those dreams and we can get the information that way. It's a bit harder than having it directly, but it gives us the advantage of not hallucinating all the time. And of course, the main stumbling block to this is that we forget dreams all the time because memory is state dependent. Right? Like for example, if you get drunk before while studying, and then you get drunk and you take the test, you'll do better than if you study sober and get drunk while taking the test, right? Because when you get drunk, you're in a different mental state, and memories are state dependent. Like if you study very relaxed and then you get take a test and you're all stressed out, you're not going to do as well. But if you study all stressed out and you take the test all stressed out, you'll actually do better. Now, of course, the best way to do good on a test is to study relaxed and then take the test relaxed. So, because not only are you relaxed, but your states are aligned. Now, when you're dreaming, your mental state is way, way radically different than when you're awake. Far more different than the difference between being sober and being drunk is. So, the idea that you'll forget so much of it, shouldn't be a surprise. And of course, the part of the dream that you do remember tends to be at the very end before you wake up. And in fact, it's that stuff at the very end that is actually when you're closer to the being awake mental state. And of course, no surprise that would be what you would remember. I was going to say something else. Yeah, and then of course that's why when you have dreams, you can actually remember stuff from prior dreams. That's what I notice. Like I'll have a dream, and then like in the dream I'll have memories from past dreams. All right. But when I'm awake, all these dream memories I can't recall, right? Because they're highly state dependent.